Officer Daniels gripped the steering wheel of his cruiser, the glow from the dashboard flickering against his jawline. Midnight patrols had a rhythm. The hum of the engine, the crackle of the radio, the occasional rustle of a plastic cup rolling down an empty street. He told himself he liked the quiet. Fewer people meant fewer problems. But deep down, he enjoyed the control that came with breaking the silence, the power to decide who belonged and who didn't. It was a Tuesday, drizzling just enough to blur the yellow lines on Main Street. The courthouse loomed at the far end of the block, tall and silent, its marble columns ghostly in the rain. That's when he saw it. A black sedan, parked slightly crooked near the curb, the tail light still glowing red as if the driver had just arrived. Daniels slowed his car, eyes narrowing. It wasn't just the parking violation that got his attention, it was the silhouette stepping out. The man was tall, wearing a dark tailored suit that looked too fine for this part of town at this hour. He carried a slim leather briefcase, moved with purpose. Daniels' hand instinctively went to the radio. He didn't call it in. He didn't need backup for something like this. Probably some lawyer who thinks he owns the street, he muttered, easing his cruiser to the curb. The rain had picked up, tapping against the windshield in nervous rhythms. Daniels stepped out, his boots splashing in shallow puddles. Evening, he said sharply, the word more of a warning than a greeting. The man looked up, polite but calm. Good evening, officer. License and registration, Daniels demanded, already expecting resistance. The man blinked, slightly puzzled, but opened his briefcase and began searching. May I ask what this is about? His voice was measured, patient, the kind that irritated Daniels even more. Improper parking, Daniels said, nodding toward the curb. And you looked a little suspicious getting out of the vehicle. The man raised an eyebrow. Suspicious. Daniels crossed his arms. It's late, sir. Courthouse is closed. Not exactly a business hour. The man nodded, his expression neutral. I work with the district offices. Had a late meeting, that's all. If you check my ID. Sir, I said license and registration. Daniels cut him off, his tone sharp enough to slice through the rain. The man hesitated, something flickering in his eyes, a flash of disbelief, then quiet resignation. He reached into his inner pocket slowly, deliberately, making sure every movement was visible. Daniels' pulse quickened anyway. Easy, he said. His hand brushed the holster again, thumb pressing against the safety strap. I'm just getting my wallet, the man said calmly. His voice didn't rise, didn't shake. He'd been through something like this before, you could tell. That only made Daniels angrier, though he couldn't have said why. When the ID came out, Daniels barely glanced at it before grabbing the man's wrist. Turn around, he ordered. Officer, now. The briefcase hit the ground, splashing mud onto the man's trousers. Daniels yanked his arm behind his back and snapped on the cuffs. The man didn't resist, didn't shout, didn't even look at him. He simply said, this is a mistake. Daniels felt a rush of irritation, that tone again, calm and superior. Yeah, we'll see about that. The man was guided toward the cruiser, rain slicking his hair, water dripping from his chin. As Daniels pushed him into the back seat, the man turned his head slightly, eyes catching the light from the dashboard. There was no anger there, only disappointment, the kind that stings worse than any curse. Officer, he said quietly, I would have gladly explained if you'd asked. Daniels slammed the door shut. He didn't answer. As he walked around to the driver's side, a strange unease crawled into his chest, the kind that comes after a decision you can't quite justify. He started the engine, the wipers squeaking across the glass, and pulled away from the curb. The courthouse faded behind them, swallowed by the rain. Name, he asked roughly. Aaron Brooks, came the calm reply. Daniels wrote it down without thinking, the letters smudging slightly on the damp page of his notepad. You live around here, Mr. Brooks. I work here, the man said. Daniels smirked. Yeah, doing what? The man didn't answer right away. His gaze shifted toward the courthouse lights disappearing behind the mist. You'll find out, he said finally, voice steady and low. Daniels frowned but said nothing more. The rain drummed harder, blurring everything outside the window, the city, the lights, the line between right and wrong. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and coffee, that mix of history and exhaustion unique to government buildings. Officer Daniels sat in the second row, his uniform crisp, his posture rigid. The morning sunlight filtered through tall windows, slicing across the polished floor in bright rectangles. He tried not to think about the night before, about the man in the suit, the rain, the look in his eyes. It was supposed to be a simple arrest. But nothing felt simple now. The room buzzed with quiet conversation. Lawyers shuffled papers, clerks whispered over case files, the bailiff stood by the door like a statue. Daniels had been ordered to attend the hearing, for procedural review, they said. He thought it was just standard protocol. Someone he'd booked overnight had turned out to be important, and the department wanted to make sure the process looked clean. But the tension in the air told him otherwise. He kept checking the double doors at the front. The judge hadn't entered yet. The prosecutor was whispering to a young woman at the defense table, flipping through notes with nervous energy. Daniels adjusted his collar, sweat prickling at his neck. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then the bailiff called out, "All rise." The room stood. The judge, a stern woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled into a bun, swept in with an air of calm authority. Daniels had seen her before in other hearings, precise, unsmiling, efficient. She took her seat, scanning the courtroom with the kind of gaze that made people straighten automatically. "You may be seated," she said, her voice even and clear. Daniels exhaled, relieved for a second. He opened his notepad, pretending to review his report. He was trying to stay invisible, one more uniform in the background. And then the side door opened. A man walked in, tall, confident, in the same dark suit Daniels had seen drenched in rain just hours earlier. His steps were unhurried, his expression unreadable. He carried no briefcase now, only a folder under his arm. He didn't look around. He didn't need to. Every head in the room turned toward him as if gravity itself had shifted. Daniels froze. His stomach dropped. The judge's face softened instantly. "Good morning, Counselor Brooks," she said, with something that almost sounded like respect. "Glad you could make it." Daniels' throat went dry. "Counselor Brooks." The man turned slightly, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met. No trace of anger, no smugness, just quiet acknowledgement. The same calm, measured presence he'd shown in the rain, but now magnified by the weight of authority. "Apologies for the delay, Your Honor," Brooks said, setting his folder on the table. "Had a long night." The judge smiled faintly. "So I've heard. Shall we begin?" The words echoed in Daniels' mind like a slow explosion. Counselor. Legal. Advisor. He could barely breathe. He looked down at his report, the one he'd written hastily after the arrest, and saw the name again, Aaron Brooks. It couldn't be a coincidence. The judge began the hearing, something about departmental oversight and police conduct. Daniels only caught fragments. His ears buzzed with a kind of static. He's the district's legal advisor. The man he'd handcuffed, shoved into a cruiser, treated like a criminal, was one of the top legal officials in the district. "Officer Daniels," the judge said suddenly. He jolted upright. "Yes, Your Honor. Since you were the arresting officer, please confirm, this is the individual you detained last night." Her finger pointed toward Brooks. Daniels' mouth went dry. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. The courtroom seemed to tighten around him. A murmur spread through the benches, lawyers exchanging glances, a few reporters scribbling notes. The prosecutor looked uneasy. Brooks spoke before the judge could continue. "Your Honor, I'm not here to press charges," he said. His tone was calm, but each word carried deliberate weight. Officer Daniels was overzealous, perhaps, but I believe this was more a matter of judgment than malice. Daniels blinked, confused. The man was defending him. The judge tilted her head. "You're being generous, Counselor. Most people wouldn't be." Brooks gave a small, tired smile. "We all make assumptions. Sometimes they come with a badge." A quiet wave of discomfort rippled through the room. Daniels felt it like a spotlight, every stare burning into his back. He wanted to disappear. He wanted to rewind time, to stop himself before stepping out of that cruiser. The judge sighed. "Very well. I'll note the incident for internal review. Officer Daniels, you're dismissed for now." He nodded stiffly, barely trusting himself to speak. "Yes, Your Honor." As he turned to leave, Brooks's voice stopped him. "Officer," he said softly. Daniels looked back. Brooks's eyes held no bitterness, only the kind of weariness that comes from living the same story too many times. I hope next time, he said, you'll start with a question instead of a command. Daniels swallowed hard. Yes, sir, he managed, though the words felt too small for the moment. Brooks gave a slight nod and turned back to the judge, already refocusing on the case. But for Daniels, the room had blurred. Every sound, the shuffle of papers, the murmur of voices, the creak of the wooden benches, felt distant. As he walked out of the courtroom, sunlight hit his face through the glass doors, too bright, almost harsh. The uniform that had always made him feel in control suddenly felt heavy, like it belonged to someone else. The hallway outside the courtroom was unnervingly quiet. Officer Daniels walked slowly, his boots echoing against the marble floor, the sound hollow and uneven, a metronome to his thoughts. The buzz of voices faded behind him, replaced by the steady hum of the building's air vents and the faint murmur of distant phones ringing. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he needed to move, to do something other than stand there and drown in what had just happened. He pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the afternoon light. The sun was sharp, cutting through his eyes after hours under fluorescent bulbs. He stopped on the courthouse steps, took a deep breath, and exhaled shakily. For the first time in his career, the badge pinned to his chest felt like it weighed more than the gun on his hip. He'd thought he knew what respect meant. He'd thought authority came from the uniform, the badge, the car, the salute. But the moment he saw Aaron Brooks walk into that courtroom, standing tall and calm, the whole foundation of that belief had cracked. Daniels had spent his career making quick judgments, trusting instincts that had been shaped by years of half-spoken lessons, who to watch, who to question, who to stop. He never thought much about where those instincts came from. Until now. He sat down on the courthouse steps, elbows on his knees, staring at the traffic crawling by. The city moved as if nothing had happened, as if one man's humiliation and another's quiet grace didn't ripple through the morning air. Behind him, the heavy doors opened again. Daniels didn't turn around at first. He didn't have to. He knew that voice now, calm and precise. Mind if I sit? He glanced up. Aaron Brooks stood there, no folder, no entourage, just a man in a dark suit and the kind of expression that made confrontation unnecessary. Daniels nodded mutely, sliding over a little. Brooks sat beside him, adjusting his cuffs with a quiet ease. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't tense, just heavy, filled with things that didn't need to be said yet. Daniels finally broke it. You could have pressed charges, he said, eyes still fixed on the street. Could have made a scene. No one would have blamed you. Brooks gave a small, tired chuckle. And what would that fix? Daniels shrugged. Maybe make me think twice next time. Brooks turned his head slightly, studying him. You're already thinking twice. That's enough for now. Daniels rubbed his face with his hands, the tension tightening his jaw. I was just doing my job. Were you? Brooks asked gently. Daniels froze. The words weren't accusing. They were curious, genuine. That made them worse. I thought I was, Daniels muttered. It was late. Car was parked wrong. You looked out of place. He winced at the sound of his own words. Guess that's the problem, huh? Brooks didn't reply immediately. He just looked ahead, watching a group of people cross the street, laughing, unaware of the conversation unfolding on the courthouse steps. Finally, he said, the problem isn't seeing something unusual. It's deciding what that means before you know the person. You didn't see me last night. You saw what you were taught to see. Daniels nodded slowly. And what did you see? Brooks gave a small smile, faint but sincere. A man doing what he thought was right, just not asking the right questions first. The honesty stung. Daniels didn't know how to respond. He'd faced angry suspects, courtroom interrogations, internal reviews, but nothing like this quiet grace that made him feel more exposed than any cross-examination ever could. I've been doing this 15 years, Daniels said after a long pause. Thought I'd seen everything. Guess I haven't seen myself too clearly. Brooks nodded. That's where most people start changing. He stood, smoothing the front of his jacket. You'll figure out what kind of officer you want to be. Just make sure it's one who listens. Daniels looked up at him. Why bother giving me that chance? Brooks's eyes softened. Because if I stop believing people can do better, Then what's the point of advising a district full of them? For a moment, the words hung between them, sharp and kind all at once. Then Brooks offered his hand. Daniels hesitated, just a second, before shaking it. The handshake was firm, steady, and in that brief grip, Daniels felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close to understanding. Brooks turned to leave, heading down the steps toward the waiting car at the curb. Daniels watched him go, the sound of his polished shoes fading into the rhythm of the street. He looked down at the metal badge gleaming on his chest, the symbol he'd always thought made him untouchable. Now it just looked like a mirror, forcing him to face the man behind it. As Brooks's car pulled away, Daniels stayed seated for a long time, the afternoon sun glinting off the courthouse windows. He thought of every stop he'd made, every question he hadn't asked, every assumption that had felt like instinct. And for the first time, he realized that real authority didn't come from power or fear. It came from humility, from seeing a man before seeing a color, just as Brooks had said. He took off his hat, set it on his knee, and whispered to himself, almost like a vow, "Next time, I'll start with a question."